Hey guys, it's Phil with the Minuteman Moment. If you've been keeping up with GOA's action alerts, you've heard about the Senate's new gun control legislation that was signed into law. Let me talk about what's inside the bill, how it passed, and how we're going to fight it. The quick summary is that the new legislation adds red flag gun confiscation, backdoor universal background checks, and a waiting period for gun purchases, just to name a few. But you already know that support for gun control always plummets during crime waves. But when there's a highly publicized mass shooting, support goes up. That's just the way it is. This demonstrates the need for legislators to stay committed to their oath to the Constitution and not be swayed by the crowd. And like clockwork, shortly after the tragedy in Uvalde, the anti-gunners didn't waste a moment to use the deaths of children for their political gain because they knew they only had emotions to work with. And emotions are fleeting. The clock was ticking. Although GOA disagrees with any expansion of gun control, one would like to think if Congress were going to decide on how they would enact gun control, they would be very careful, selective, transparent, and deliberative to think about the legislation. But that's not the way it happened. Instead, 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats got together and signed a vague framework. You probably heard about that, which laid out what they wanted to do. There were several provisions in that framework which dealt with mental health or making schools more secure, which Congress should be debating and discussing. But there were a lot of alarming provisions in the framework like backdoor universal background registration checks, red flag gun confiscation orders, wait periods, and enhanced background checks for people under 21, a lifetime gun ban for misdemeanor crimes, and another ban on straw purchases. Because if criminals are still doing an illegal thing, I guess we just need to make it more illegal. And for a couple weeks, 4 senators discussed what an actual text would look like. What's most insidious about these negotiations is how absurdly they were defended. Republicans argued they did a good job by getting out extreme gun control wish list items, like magazine bans or waiting periods or red flag laws. But here's the funny thing, they negotiated nothing. The best way they could have negotiated out all of those terrible provisions is if they didn't even offer a deal to begin with. This was never a negotiation or compromise. If it were either, pro-gun folks would have gotten something out of this deal, like ending gun-free zones, allowing willing teachers to be armed at work, concealed carry reciprocity, anything. Senators who came to the table to this deal already wrongly believed that guns make us less safe, and were too desperate to find a way to take away guns to listen to our reasoning. While they were negotiating the specific language of the text, GOA was already working behind the scenes. We were constantly having meetings with Senate and House staff, sending out resources of information to them and doing constant media hits to inform the public on the dangers of this framework. Once we actually got to see the text, which was released at about 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 21st of June, we pored over it, and I have to say, for all those senators' hard work crafting precise, clear, and limited language, the whole thing was a joke. Thankfully, when the 4 senators reached a deal on the legislative language, then they started to undertake the great and thorough process of deliberation and discussion in the Senate. This ended up getting rammed through the Senate using a bill that was supposed to be for renaming a post office, added a massive amendment to that bill which contained the text they all agreed on, pulled it out of committee, and then threw it on the floor only after senators and staffers had less than 2 hours to even review the text of that amendment before they started voting on it. It cleared the filibuster that night with all Democrats and, of course, 14 Republicans joining in. Senator Cruz fought to just have amendments to be offered as an option to vote on, but he was shot down by a vote of 39 to 58. After getting voted on for final passage, it sailed over to the House, and after maximized chaos, that was the day the Brune case was released. More on that in another video. The only time this bill went through a committee was when it went through the House Rules Committee. The only thing determined in this committee was that there would be no changes and a ban on any members offering any amendments. Yes, believe it or not, they can actually do that. It then went to the House floor for a vote that morning. And interestingly, 14 Republican representatives voted for it, which is less than the amount of Republican senators who voted for it. And after it passed, it went to President Biden's desk to get a signature. The reason they gave why this had to be rushed is because their self-imposed deadline was before the 4th of July recess, which unlike the rest of us, they get 2 weeks off. Had they offered room for amendments, then it would have needed to go back to the Senate to be voted on, and that would have taken more time. The real reason for their push is because they knew the more time people had to think about infringing on people's rights, the more time people would understand that it's a bad idea. What makes this so disingenuous is if they really believe the bill would have saved thousands of lives, who cares about your 2-week vacation? If they really believed in what they were doing, they would stay in DC and work it out. So the whole idea that they had some deadline which justified them rushing this through is ludicrous. The deadline was put in place so they wouldn't miss out on a 2-week vacation. Not that you get one. Not because they cared about the kids. The simple reason why it passed is too many self-proclaimed pro-gun senators decided that they really just didn't care about your gun rights. Almost none of them are in vulnerable states. They're in safe Republican strongholds, and so they didn't need to come off as moderates. They each just really wanted this. And so of all the senators that voted for this, 4 of them are retiring. And guys, I am really proud to say that GOA fought this thing every step of the way. And at no point did we take our foot off the gas. It was all hands on deck for the last 4 weeks. We're always in the trenches, but the last 4 weeks, that's when we really earned it. Everyone fought as hard as they could and as best as they could for as long as they could. And we're all still fighting. We're in talks now about getting a member to introduce legislation repealing the entire law. We plan on suing each unconstitutional provision, and we're working with our state directors to see how we can fight this at the state level. I've said it before, GOA is operating in all spaces, federal, the courts, and at the states. We know this fight isn't over because the anti-gunners don't think it's over. Already, Senator Chris Murphy is saying that this is only the beginning.
I'm going to tell you, once we show Republicans that there is more political gain than harm in voting for things like this, it's going to open up a lot of more possibilities in the future.
There are lots of two-way victories that we can be proud of at this week. Not just legislation we've had members introduce, but also obviously at the Supreme Court, and I'll share more of them later on. All right, that's it for this week. I'm Phil with the Minuteman Moment. I'll see you soon.